Hey everybody, welcome back. It's me, your host Dan. We're gonna look at one of my favorite books of cartooning, pretty much ever. This is William Steig. This is, I believe, his final book. Um, they're out there. It's not the easiest thing in the world to get a hold of, but they're it's worth the hunt. And so, what makes this book worth looking at? Why are we looking at this right now? Um, those of you who know of William Steig uh, probably know of William Steig as like a children's book author, and most probably he's the guy who created Shrek in a much different form than the one in the DreamWorks movies. But that's not what we're going to look at today. I think a little bit of biographical information about Steig is in order to kind of put this book in perspective. So Steig had a very, very long career as a cartoonist. His early work, his very early work, looks kind of like Peter Arno mixed with the guy who did Nancy. It's like he's trying to fit in at the New Yorker. He does get work at the New Yorker. There's like hints of what's going to come later. And I'm going to show off that book in a future video. I'm going to show off a compilation of the first few books of his called the Steig album. But here I think it made more sense to begin at the end because this is the most compelling argument for why Steig is one of the all time great cartoonists. And he does some very unusual things in his method producing this book, right? Uh, so Steig begins in the 50s, and eventually he matures into this very scratchy style that's like a little influenced by kind of what Picasso was doing a little earlier, more kind of the fine art world to some extent than cartooning per se. And even though, like, clearly he has a decent amount of drawing fundamentals, he wants the pictures to look this way. Uh, Steig was possibly the world's most ardent adherent of the late Professor Wilhelm Reich, who wrote a very good book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism. But Steig, in particular, was drawn to Reich's theory of orgone. So, for those of you who don't know, Steig's not Steig's idea of organoids by way of Wilhelm Reich was that your body has this kind of energy field around it. It produces, kind of radiates like life force or whatever, kind of like heat off of it, and it also had something to do with your sex life because Reich was one of the only people who tried to kind of synthesize Marxism and Freud's thinking into like one thing. Anyway, in practical terms, what this meant was that William Steig had a thing called an orgone box in his backyard, and it was just kind of like I think I've seen pictures of it. It was just like a wooden box that kind of looks like an outhouse without like a place to poop in it. And you would close the door, and the idea is you kind of like marinate in your own quote unquote organs. And anyway, William Steig did that a lot. He illustrated a book that was published posthumously by I forget the publisher, but it was written by Wilhelm Reich when he was in prison before he died, and it's called Listen, Little Man. And I don't have a copy of that, but I think the illustrations would be worth looking at. That was one of the first places I saw Steig's work, and decided to start pursuing looking for books of his work. Thankfully, there are a fair number of books of his stuff. For me, the this is the pick of the litter. I'm giving you the best first because I want to make a good first impression on all you folks who aren't familiar with William Steig. So the process he used to draw these cartoons is he would kind of sit in the, or as best as I understand it, I wasn't there, but was he would sit in the orgone box in his backyard for, I don't know, half an hour to an hour, and then he would go to his kitchen table, I believe. And I have seen originals of a fair number of these, and they're pretty small. They were on display at the Norman Rockwell Museum in Massachusetts. And so he does the drawing straight to pen with no preparation. They're supposed to be kind of purely subconscious. And then he does like kind of New Yorker style gag captions, but he doesn't stick to a humorous tone, and they have this kind of the combination of the words and the pictures brings this really compelling, somber, kind of tragic tone to this book. I guess you could look at this sort of like, how the French have that idea of like testament movies, how a director's last movie is very often a summation of their earlier work, or they'll go back to a lot of themes throughout their career, sort of like an aesthetic, artistic version of your life flashing before your eyes. I've never really looked at this book quite like that, but I mean, it might be worth a look. Maybe we'll think about that as we go through. He's a master of doing a lot with very little. Like, this is not a very complicated drawing. He really gets very specific facial expressions. And I think, like, a good rule of thumb for cartoonists, especially if you have limited technical ability like I do, um, the thing that's going to sell your dialogue, very often the first thing the eye is going to be drawn to is a face. Try to make the faces like, don't use other people's faces, right? um, Norman Rockwell was very bad at doing that. Like, his facial expressions in most of his paintings are kind of very generic, and it takes me out of the painting, even though like there's all this technical mastery of folds and light. um I don't like it as much as like portraits that have a very specific expression. I've done a lot of cartooning using something pretty close to Steig's method. I don't have an orgone box, or am I particularly interested in locking myself in a small box for an hour a day. But I'll just grab the paper. I purposely use ink. I usually use like a cheap bank pen because they don't kind of works like a pencil. It's just like a really dark pencil, it feels like to me. And then I draw a line, I draw another line. I don't really think like I'm going to draw this specific picture, and then I just see what comes out and try to think of the words that go around it after that, and or if it even needs words. So this is 1990. I believe Steig died in 91. So this is, and it mentions in this foreword that he's been working for 50 years. I believe Jean was his wife, but don't quote me on that. If anybody knows for sure and you're listening, put it in the comments. While you're at it, subscribe because I got a bunch more cool videos coming for you. So, hope you're excited. And so, what's so compelling to me about this specific book of cartoons is this kind of haunted, morose quality. Uh, I think Steig is more fixated on regret than any other cartoonist. And, they're kind of, if we're taking this to be pictures of the inside of his mind, if we go with the kind of the Orgone box is real narrative and kind of meet him on his own terms. I don't know, this isn't a happy picture. It says the napper wakes. You have a grown man in a baby carriage, and to add insult to injury, he's much smaller than the baby carriage. He looks lost and kind of helpless, and the landscape around him is just barren trees and gray ground, and just an ocean of white space around the page. And, that kind of sets the tone for a lot of what's in here, but uh, I don't know. Yeah, I guess you kind of feel it or you don't feel it, but let's look at some more of them. His bodies are very often they're contorted into what I guess I would call like subtle cartoony ways, or subtly cartoony poses. This is sort of out of a romance novel, and the small moon. I think the grayscale, like the gray wash that he uses to sort of make the book duotone, do a lot to influence the tone and kind of how these resonate. Also note the lack of panel borders. Um, I consider these comics because they're thematically interrelated, and the interplay of the words in the pictures is crucial. Like, I don't think this book would work nearly as well if you just, well, I don't know, if you block off the word, it's still a pretty compelling book of illustrations, but the captions add a lot. And you look at these drawings and you kind of think like, if this was the New Yorker caption contest, um, what would you even submit for these? Like this isn't a very, it's not a wry or like a jovial drawing. Traveling companions, he actually, that is a pretty good New Yorker punchline. This one says, someday he'll come along. This reminds me of that bit in the Ernie Kovacs Eugene special for ABC where it's all silent and he finds like he's in this weird shifting room and he sees this mannequin and he touches the mannequin. For a second, it turns into a human woman, and then it shatters into like a million pieces. And yeah, that's another kind of odd, haunting moment. And, the being trapped in a bottle. Also, is this the same character as the guy in the baby carrot? No, okay, no. It's a similar looking person, but he kind of draws. He doesn't. He's not building distinct characters, so just having 4 or 5 kind of regular cast players to throw into cartoons, it works for him. This one is the first one without a caption. The man looks so longingly, but it's just the bust of a mannequin on like a wheeled cart, and he's just in the woods. It's a surreal dream image, but you still get the sense of what it's trying to tell you in a broad sense, like very quickly. Just a very grotesque looking grown baby man. Man answering a questionnaire. I guess he was kind of at a loss for how to uh, how to caption that one. And, this is one of the happier illustrations. And yeah, this is kind of a little more. There's more stern, disapproving female figures in this book than there are, like, this is one of very few happy looking people in this book. Um, yeah. These two are kind of connected. I wonder if he did these in the same day or if he, like, went back to this after a while. And his distortions of the forms, they kind of feel more personal because the way he's distorting the figures doesn't seem to be. It's not because of it's not. He's not starting from the actual anatomy of a dog or like a cockroach or an ant or whatever that is. Um, it's supposed to look very quick and dashed off, and in not just kind of letting the process occur without a lot of conscious thought or motivation, it kind of does reveal. Like, I don't, I didn't know William Steig personally or anything, but it gives you the sense that he's sharing you something intimate but in code, like Freud's at the beginning of interpretation of dreams, where he's talking about the uh, the dream being kind of a distorted, like waved water, right? And I love these fake bugs, and that it's like a hippie raisin sun, and that kind of like blank expression woman for the moon. This expression shows up a lot in this book. Sort of a third panel. I think these three sort of make up a triptych, and you could argue that triptychs were close to the first cartoons. I guess, like, if you're making that argument, you'd have to include hieroglyphics. No captions for a few pages. That is just a very odd, slightly unsettling drawing of a cat. And oh shit, my phone is running out of battery, so let's pick this up where we left off. And second part I'm going to record once my phone is a little more charged. Good stuff. See you in the funny papers.